Now, though, he's all for intervening in Libya. We'll be asking two Conservatives, both called Douglas, if events are driving the shape of government policy on the Arab world. And so what do Conservatives make of David Cameron's shift in tone? Another former Foreign Secretary, Lord Hurd, is here with me in the studio, along with Douglas Murray, Director of the Centre for Social Cohesion. Douglas Murray, how much of a shift do you think we've had from David Cameron since he's been in power? I think it's been quite a distinct shift. I mean, he's very keen on talking, certainly has been until very recently, talking of himself as a sort of realist, an old-school realist, understands the world, isn't going to fall. He always uses the word naive. I'm not a naive neocon, he likes to say. The thing is that events in recent weeks have vindicated, in my opinion, the neoconservative argument, which has been that democracy is not something alien to the Arab world or to the Muslim world. It's something that they want, that they deserve, they should have, and we should encourage them to have.
So you think he's become a neocon?
So I think, in other words, he's seen that he doesn't want to be on the wrong side of history, and to that extent, he's an opportunist. Douglas Hurd, do you think he's become a neocon then? Enough of a shift of tone?
He firmly denies that. He says, I'm a liberal conservative, I'm not a neocon. The thing to remember about the Prime Minister is that he is a cool customer. And he's not going to get into things which he doesn't see the end of. That's why I'm sure that actually he's now hostile to the Iraq experiment as it was carried out. That's to say, the homework was not done. What are the consequences of the intervention? So you've got hostile crowds in Baghdad tonight shouting against their own government. So he's cool and calculating.
But if you look at what he's saying on the Middle East now, 3 months ago, essentially, he was talking about how he had this hard-headed internationalism. Yeah. He wanted to have a more commercial foreign policy. If we were being that commercial in Libya, we wouldn't be calling for the end of Gaddafi and for him to be held to account.
You have to follow the facts. You can't always govern the facts, you have to follow them. The fact of the matter is that Gaddafi's time has run out. Whatever been the past policy, it has to change. And we therefore, it's right, of course, Douglas Murray is right in this, that the countries which are stable and have chances of prosperity are countries which are liberal and which encourage democracy. And we are entirely entitled to say to the King of Saudi Arabia, for example, please accelerate your reforms. But we're also saying to the King of Saudi Arabia tonight, for heaven's sake, step up your oil production. Well, we have a huge interest.
Are we saying that?
Yes, we are.
Do you believe that we're saying that, or saying it to a sufficient extent?
No, I mean, at the moment, British foreign policy is being run to an extent the way it has always been run, in our own interests. And there's obviously it's a perfectly defensible position to run a foreign policy in your own interests. But I think that one of the things that David Cameron has admitted this week, his speech in Kuwait, the most striking thing about that was that he said that era of Britain supporting dictators is over. It was an immoral period. And the thing I think that he's finally sort of picked up on in this is that the reason why supporting dictators is bad is not just that it's bad in itself, but that it also ends up coming back on you. It causes resentment from within the peoples who have been under dictators you've supplied with arms, been friendly with, given normal diplomatic relations.
But if you believe that era is over, then surely the obvious next step is that export licenses of arms to Saudi Arabia should be revoked. How can you have one stance for one part of the Arab world and another for another?
The answer is you can't. And that I think that one of the interesting things that we'll see in the coming weeks, I mean, there's protests planned in Saudi Arabia. We'll see whether or not they happen. But I think one of the things that we have to keep an eye on at the moment in the Middle East is that quite a lot of these very fragile, relatively fragile states, like Egypt, like Libya, like Tunisia, are at risk of toppling. The regime's changing, that's fine. But the really autocratic states, the Saudi Arabias, the Irans, those could, after this phase, still remain in place, still remain strong. And that'll mean that David Cameron very much has to think this policy through.
Lord Hurd, this is a chance for us to be ahead of the curve if we were behind the curve elsewhere on Saudi Arabia.
I don't think that David Cameron is looking around the world for dragons to slay. That's not his temperament, that's not his style, that's not his doctrine. He's not going to go for any doctrine which involves committing British troops to intervention on behalf of democracy in overseas countries.
But you want to be seen as a leader of principle. That's really important in all of this, isn't it?
You can't do everything. And whenever you pick and choose, which is what we are doing, you're perfectly right. When we pick and choose, you have this argument about double standards. We are not going to go to war with China to free Tibet. We're not. And no one is seriously suggesting that we should. So you have to pick and choose. And then you are exposed to the risk of saying your double standards. If you behave differently to Saudi Arabia, then to Libya. You are, and you just have to run that risk. That is just.
Doug Smyry, I just want to ask you though about if you do believe that we're in this new era, then do we have the tools to operate in this new era? For instance, HMS Cumberland, which is part of the evacuation effort from Libya, is one of the vessels that's actually going to be axed as part of the defence.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can't evacuate a few hundred people from Libya, bringing democracy in a military way, of course, isn't on the table. I think this is a crucial thing, though. Always it's talked about as if neoconservatives and others only were talking about it as armed intervention. It isn't just about armed intervention. It's about diplomatic intervention. It's about whether or not you should normalise tyrannical regimes. The era of doing that, I think, has shown itself to be a failure. It's shown itself a failure in the Middle East, in successive countries now. And the question is whether or not Britain, without using armed force, wants to be on the right side of history and saying the era of dictators is over, we will not be doing business with them. Game up.
Douglas Murray, Lord Hurd, thank you very much to you both.